Do you guys remember places?
Vaguely, yeah.
Nah.
Well, this is one such place.
This is a
Welcome.
place. In the world somewhere.
Welcome to Remember Places.
Welcome, first viewer, because we're going to upload this, we're going to have no viewers. So one of you is going to be the first viewer. Welcome to Remember Places. This is a podcast where we touch grass. I'm reaching down. You probably can't see it. I'm touching grass.
Oh, it's real. It's 100% real.
It's unsettling. It's very slick and cold.
Ugh. Touching grass. Who does that? Yeah, we're out here touching grass for the first episodes. We're starting at a high point. We're starting at the point that you'd usually end at, touching grass. So I don't know if that makes us more immediately mature as podcasters or what. I think that makes us better than other podcasts.
Starting off,
is what I'm saying.
It's ambitious. Yeah, setting our sights high, elevation-wise.
We're starting from a high place.
Well, we're out of the basement. We're out of the brick house. So we're getting you guys out in the field too. And basically, we want to use this show as an opportunity to encourage you guys to get out of your proverbial basements and dungeons and see the world for what it is and really get out here and explore. And to that end, as gamers who are touching grass for the first time, we're going to be talking a lot about gaming and talking about worlds. And today, we're talking about open worlds, which is what brings us out to this field.
Yeah, we're getting outside so that we can talk about inside activities.
Precisely.
Full circle. Going
Also,
full circle.
we're making it so that you all can stay inside and be involved in outside activities.
And this is a
It works
vicarious
both
journey.
ways.
You can also watch this on your phone outside if you want. Just make sure brightness is going to have to go up a lot.
Yeah, so we're talking about open world stuff, I guess. Open world games, open world experiences.
And it might not hurt just to take a quick second to say who we are. And I suppose I'll start.
None of us are famous. I don't think they care who we are. But go for it.
So this is for the comments. You guys can call us out by name and personally insult our appearances.
Yeah.
But my name is Kyle, and I guess we'll go around. I'll start with my favorite place. My favorite place is with you, the viewers. Wherever you are,
Already
I am.
pandering.
And hit that like, comment, and subscribe, and just keep me in mind when you do that.
I'm Trevor, and my favorite place is empty malls. We'll get into more of that later, but I think there's liminal spaces. Yes.
Hey, this isn't the liminal space episode. This is the open world episode.
I'm jumping the gun, but places can be indoors, places can be outdoors. It's all about going from one area to another. We'll get into this, but all memory is spatial. That's why you forget what you're doing when you walk into another room. That's your memories are back there. And so that means the more places you go, honestly, the more memories you make, in my opinion. That's why I'm excited to see how this develops.
How big does a space have to be considered open world?
Well, that's a great place to start. I think the most important, kind of the first bullet point here is what makes an open world game? Is it just having a circular or a square, like large space that you can move around in, or is there something more to it within that?
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent question, but we're not going to let you get out of this one, Stuart. You got to introduce yourself too. I saw you dodging that bullet.
Nobody cares who I am. I'm Stuart. What's my favorite place? I don't know. I guess I really like water levels. I spend a lot of time underwater. I'm a scuba diver, both in my personal enjoyment and also I did it sort of semi-professionally for a while. I'm a diver at the Seattle Aquarium. You can catch me in those tanks, but I like my water levels. So let's go with that.
Glub.
Under the water, anywhere. So yeah, what makes an open world game then, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think scope is obviously part of it. I think if you were to hypothetically have a game that was like one room and you can do whatever you want, that would be maybe fun. But I don't think I would call it an open world game. I think the key word there, well, and all of those words are key. I think game, obviously, world, but open. The scale and the scope of it. And I think that even older games, I don't know what the first open world game is. I guess that could be an interesting discussion.
Adventure.
There we go. Yeah, and I think the.
I guess so, huh?
Having options. Having options, I think that the world being large, that there's nothing to do, it doesn't really matter. It's just a place that you're walking around. I think it's the difference. It's a difference of quality as well as quantity. And I mean, you can have bad open world games. Obviously, we'll talk about a few in a minute, I think. But I think a lot of it is it's a real place or a fictional place that has some degree of, I guess, authenticity. Even if it's fictional, it's like there's shops, there's missions or side missions. There's different environments. It doesn't all necessarily look the same, and you can put yourself in the shoes of a certain character or somebody that you create, and feel like you're becoming a part of this place. It's not a tunnel or corridor shooter. It's not something abstract like a puzzle game. It's this is Middle Earth, or this is pick a Star Wars planet. I mean, they got a Star Wars open world game coming out. I think it's as much about the concept as it is about the execution.
Are you talking about the one that just came out, Survivor? Or
oh, well, no, it's funny you mentioned
new
that.
One.
Because I've been playing that a bit, and it does have some sections that are, and I'll put a pin in that, wide linear.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about wide linear?
Yeah, I was going to ask mechanically what counts as an open world game, because if does the entire game map need to be available to you without loading, or are loading screens available?
Well, and I think that's an excellent question, because there are a couple examples of this I can name. Wide linear as a concept. Kyle, you familiar with that?
So I don't know why, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is like Kirby and the Forgotten Land. In the way that you're moving kind of open in different areas, but it's very much directing you along a particular path. But you're saying that it's maybe even a little bit more open than that.
So wide linear, the first time that I heard it used was God of War 2018, because there is a very large hub area that you can loop back around in a lot of circular ways. But there is like a specific plot. There are side quests, but it's not, you are being funneled along a specific path, and you have to do things for the most part in a certain order. And another example, I might be the only person who's played this, but Gears of War 5, there are sections of the game that are wide linear. There are missions that are linear, and then there are missions where you end up in this enormous area, and there's a bunch of different, you can do things in multiple different orders, and like you have a vehicle, and it's very large. It becomes open world, but then it shrinks back down again.
So I know that the Souls series is kind of well known too for having, for the most part, increasingly open games, with Elden Ring being the most open by far. I know a lot of people have complained about Dark Souls 3 as being among the more linear ones, and I'll admit I haven't played the first two. I'm just not brave enough, I guess, to do them. But I thought Dark Souls 3 felt relatively open world to me, but a lot of people say that's actually very linear.
Yes, and that brings us to another point, which is that it's not just about the size of the world, and it's not just about having interconnected parts. I think it really is, I mean, as simplistic as it might sound, just you have more ways you can go from point A to point B. Yeah. Because Elden Ring is considered, and I got a lot to say about that, I'm sure both of you do too, but we'll talk about that in more detail. But I think it is the first capital O open world From Software game, because you have parts that are gated, you have parts that are you can only get to certain ways, but you walk out in Limgrave and there is just like stuff. And you can, if you want, you can go pretty much anywhere. You're not railroaded to a degree. Conversely, like a Metroidvania, which is, I think, to a degree what Dark Souls and Bloodborne are, you have routes that snake around at each other. The world itself physically, digitally, but you look at it, it blows up. It's very large, but you have to go certain directions. The difficulty of the game comes from having to go certain places. That's the loop of those games. Is, oh god, I gotta go through here. I gotta do the corpse run, like that. It's structured,
and you're gated by either items or getting good.
Yeah, and Elden Ring is obviously very difficult as well. But you have if you don't like the fact that you're stuck on something, you just go somewhere else, and you can do other things.
You can make it easier. I mean, in Elden Ring, you can make it easier on yourself by going elsewhere. You can go look for better items. You can go practice on easier enemies.
Yeah.
You're not gated in either way.
Yeah, and I think that what makes a good open world game, in my opinion, and this can kind of be a good segue to that, is I think good open world games allow you to do a lot of different things, but they don't make you feel like you've missed something, or that you don't feel pressure to do things in a certain way. And I think to a certain degree that's inevitable. I mean, one of the criticisms I did hear about Elden Ring is people who were like, oh, I didn't find this cave until later and I was super overpowered. And I get that. I mean, I'm the kind of guy who, I do enjoy the tough fights, but I'm also I like getting the softball every now and then. It is kind of satisfying to find some crypt you didn't see before and just roundhouse one of those grave robber dogs or whatever in 2 seconds. But I can see where people are coming from with that, but I don't really know what the solution to that is. I guess it would be scaling it, like the game can tell how high a level you are bar and everything just keeps going up.
Yeah, which Tears of the Kingdom does do sort of. Like when you explore more of the bokoblins and the moblins, the different enemies will sort of become the blue, the black, the silver, and it kind of ramps stuff up. Like I was late game exploring parts of that map and was finding places I'd never been before, and the enemies were tougher. And I think if I'd gotten there earlier, there wouldn't have been quite that scaling. But the enemy variety, let's face it, in those games is also pretty basic. So in like a Souls game, you know, I guess you could bump up the damage the boss does maybe, or more health. I mean, I don't know.
I'm going to say it. I don't like auto-scaling enemies.
Oh. I like the sense of getting better, and I think
and there's no sense of that if you enemy scale.
You will never get good.
Yeah, because like in Dark Souls, like the satisfaction comes from you go back to those earlier areas for one reason or another, and you are just putting people through walls.
Yeah.
And if everything just is always like kind of difficult or more, like if everything stays the same, you don't get that satisfaction.
Yeah, exactly. There's no sense of progression.
Yeah, and I think that is important, and I think. I mean, when you put it like that, I do agree. I think it just depends on the kind of game because From Software Souls games are very much cater to the kind of person who is into that, and I think that Zelda games are a little bit more accessible. They choose to be more accessible, and I think that
but
part
to
of that,
fault in some cases. Like, I mean, a classic example of this isn't even Zelda, it's Oblivion. Like, late game Oblivion was comical because you'd have highwaymen attacking you and they'd have like late game weapons and be like higher level. You'd be like, but these are the beginner highwaymen. Like, why are they... How do they suddenly have like glass armor and stuff like that?
It's not as organic.
Yeah, it totally takes you out of the experience. And like I said, I think Zelda gets away with it by being not having an explicit leveling system, but like just be bold. Make a Death Mountain extremely difficult. And to me, then when I finally conquer that is much more satisfying. Or if I'm just like super good and I conquer it early, arguably even more satisfying because I know that this is something that's beyond what I should be able to do as a beginner player. But maybe it's a reward. Like, especially with Tears of the Kingdom being a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, maybe that acts as almost a reward where it's like, hey, we see you. You played Breath of the Wild and you're already better than you should be. And so you're going to cruise through something that otherwise a beginner player wouldn't be able to do.
That's a good point.
I like that hint at genuine player skill that's static but varying enemy levels or difficulty requires.
And I think with that approach, and this is something that I think the Souls games do especially well, and Elden Ring was my entry point. I kind of did it backwards. But in those games, you also have better rewards for conquering that greater difficulty. It's more than just like the achievement showing up on your system. It's
like here's 50 rupees.
Or here's 50 rupees. While we're making these comparisons between Breath of the Wild / Tears of the Kingdom and something like an Elden Ring, I think that having that higher difficulty system also merits greater rewards, and that's something where in the scant instances in, let's say, Tears of the Kingdom, I'll try not to be too spoilery, but there's some parts where you have to fight some pretty difficult enemies and overcoming really difficult challenges, and the reward is something that you could have just wandered off the side of the road and found anywhere else. And maybe this is kind of getting us onto another subject of open world games, but like, not only is there questions of the scalability of difficulty and how do you do that in a world where you can go anywhere at any time that you want, but like, how do you approach those rewards for exploring the world and maybe going to the places less traveled or more difficult? And like, I mean, I guess kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Elden Ring and the other Souls games do a better job of actually encouraging exploration, even more so than Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, because you're like, this path is really difficult and remote, but I know I will get something really freaking cool for choosing to go there.
Let's talk about Tears of the Kingdom, relatively current events, current development. I know, Stuart, you have not beaten it yet, right?
No, I'm making it take a long time.
Gotcha. So I think this will be a fun challenge. Kyle and I think we can try to talk about it in broad terms, but I think it's the kind of game, and I do say this as a point of praise, where there's so much to talk about even without talking about the story. Yeah. And I think that in some ways, again, talking about open world games and Nintendo games specifically, where the gameplay and the things that it does visually and conceptually, you can talk about from 30,000 feet.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Literally in this game, and be able to not, I mean, that experience is something that you can discuss, I think. And I think, for me, it's like, I beat it. Kyle and I have beaten the game, and I mean, Kyle, where do you feel it stacks up in the series at this point?
Well, to answer that question, I have to kind of address Breath of the Wild because to me they're kind of inextricably intertwined. I mean, they're really, so connected at the hip. Basically the same overworld, same, direct story and whatnot. And I always called Breath of the Wild my favorite game of all time. That sense of adventure, of exploration, it's something that I grew up with as a kid with the original Zelda and loving open world games. And Breath of the Wild was just like the best of the best in so many respects of how it approached that. I don't know, and this is maybe a topic for a different day. I still actually have another Zelda game that's my favorite Zelda game of all time, which sounds weird because I'm saying Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time. I actually think Twilight Princess is on sort of a different level, and there's things about like when I played it during my childhood and whatnot that influenced that too. But talking about where Tears of the Kingdom stacks up with that sort of perspective I already had on Breath of the Wild, I think it really makes Breath of the Wild kind of obsolete in some respects.
Yeah,
I mean,
I kind of agree.
Stuart has made some excellent points about certain things that maybe it did slightly better with the Guardians and whatnot, but you have the addition of the sky, of the depths. It's that much more to explore. Caves is such just like a 101 concept for not just Zelda but open world explanation is to go into the mountains and the places that you see. Having caves added just so much more wanting to go around everywhere I looked and not just being content with going up and over hills, but what's inside of them. And I think I just really
truly
enjoyed
is Breath of the Wild 1.5.
It really is. I mean, and you guys out there can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this started as a DLC pack. I think that Tears of the Kingdom was going to be a big DLC drop, and as it grew, they were like, "Oh shoot, this is getting big enough. Maybe we should just make this a direct sequel." And it plays that way. And what I will say, which a little bit colors what I say about it being an evolution of Breath of the Wild, but it's also not as exciting as Breath of the Wild through no fault of its own.
Yes, through fault of its own.
Well, so much of what
the shrines, man, the shrines.
Well, so much of what made Breath of the Wild. I mean, and that's you hit the nail right on the head. I think that Breath of the Wild, there is no Tears of the Kingdom without Breath of the Wild, but it improves upon everything that was in Breath of the Wild. So I think, and this is about art, gaming in general, but like there's some pieces of media where the first time you experience it is what makes it great.
Yes.
And I think Breath of the Wild was to just be exposed to that world, and especially in a franchise and a series that never really had that. And again, talking about the difference between a big world and an open world. Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, those are big worlds. I don't consider them open world because it doesn't incentivize you to do this exploration and like give you things to do while you're there. And all of that is to say that Breath of the Wild was very much, again, it was a statement of intent. It was them working on that format, and I think it was about the world, and it was rather slight in other respects. I did find the Divine Beast lacking as dungeons in a sense. And but Tears of the Kingdom added a bunch of things I didn't even really know I wanted, which was an entire horrifying underworld and like flying islands and like bringing back dungeons. I think that they're still a bit small, but I mean it's better bosses, better story. The gameplay mechanics are just the stuff you can do with the physics is just nuts. And absolutely, if I was to ever go back to play Breath of the Wild, I would find it wanting. I would find all these things I wish were there instead. And so I think it's a quintessential. It's a sequel in a way that games can have sequels where it's like, yeah, here's all this stuff, same engine, same overworld for the most part, but we've added all of these other things on top of it. I almost see it more like when they make a new Madden game every year, where it's like, unless you're a real purist or whatever, you're not going to go back and play the old one because everything is also there, but then here's all this other stuff and it looks a little bit better.
Yeah, I think it's almost a sequel to a fault, though. Like, I like it, don't get me wrong, but I just really, like, Shrines hit okay. I still wasn't really that all right with them being a replacement for true temples, but Shrines were like okay the first time around because at least it was a fresh idea. It's like, hey, we're gonna throw you all these different self-contained puzzles. I can see the appeal. The rewards were fine enough for that, but I just don't want to do 150 of them again. Like, it's just doesn't hit as well the second time. It just doesn't.
Yeah, and because I heard
it's not unique anymore.
And I think that's the other thing about open world games to a degree is I almost feel like they put that stuff in there so you can do all of it if you want to. But I feel like, and especially with Korok seeds and stuff, the idea is that no matter where you go, where you airdrop, teleport, wherever, you're gonna find one of these things.
Yeah.
And so I think it's less about like I never feel pressure to do all of them because it's like it's a video game. I don't want to. I just don't.
I do because I want all the hearts.
Okay,
I want all the stamina.
You control the buttons you press. So, but I think it's just like to me it's like kind of the ADD sort of thing where it's like I'm like I'm gonna pick this piece of grass up. I'm gonna shoot that guy with an arrow. I'm gonna go into this thing. I'm gonna start the side quest. Like the kinds of games that I like, open world or not, are where you just have like this stuff is happening, but like it is coherent. It's not just shaking keys in front of a baby's face, but it's like there's all these things to do.
But there's stuff to do around you all the time.
Yeah. There's and no matter where you are, and I think that having an abundance of shrines, an abundance of Korok seeds, even breakable weapons. I know that's a contentious topic, but I feel like it incentivizes you to find more weapons. Yeah. Because otherwise, I mean, I can see a person just getting a stick at the beginning of the game and just buffing it the heck up and just never getting anything else. And I guess you can also do that like in Elden Ring because they took away weapon durability. But I think having different types of weapons and it incentivizes you to improvise and throw them at enemies. Like there's consequences for if it breaks. I got kind of heated about it in Breath of the Wild, and I guess that's something that they could have changed. But they brought the fuse mechanic in.
I mean, the fuse mechanic offsets it a lot, I will say. But I still want better rewards that are weapon related. I want I know you get the Master Sword, and the Master Sword does its stupid thing that they've done for 2 games now, where it's like, it runs out of steam, better recharge it. Like, this is totally ridiculous. It's the Master Sword. When you get that, I know it's going to cause a bunch of people to immediately abandon any other weapons, but fine. Like, so what? Just let people do that. Let people play how they want to play instead of railroading into, you literally have the most powerful sword in the entire canon, but it runs out if you hit a regular enemy with it 10 times. Like, it's just insulting to the lore of the Master Sword. Like, come on.
It enfeebles it. And the fact that you go all the way down to the depths and you find like a pruned up, wrinkly mummy Ganondorf, and he just like takes one look at Link and just blows up the Master Sword with whatever feeble amount of energy he still possesses. To me, it was like, well, the Master Sword's really not that powerful, is it?
No. I know Fuse, I never really checked. Does it make a weapon last longer, or does it increase does it bring back lost durability, or does it just delay the inevitable?
That's a good question.
Because an improvement, and I gather these games are making so much money. I strongly suspect that another Zelda is probably going to at least function like this, whether or not it's the same overworld.
Yeah.
One improvement I could see is ways to increase the durability or restore lost durability of weapons if you want to do that. I mean, if you don't have the resources or you don't want to spend them, that's fine. But if you are the kind of person who's like, yeah, I do like this weapon and I don't want it to fall apart forever and have to do a whole thing to get it again.
And armor doesn't disappear. Like, so let's just do it for weapons too. That was
it. Like, that was my main. The thing that I really was most excited to do in the game was go to the fairy fountains, because there is a cute little side missions. But like, yes, more objectively permanent increases to my armor. Because
I love armor.
Obviously, we talked about Elden Ring in terms of a Kingdom Breath of the Wild. Elden Ring was openly, gloriously inspired by Breath of the Wild. Mm-hmm. Breath of the Wild was inspired by the Ubisoft open world games.
Yes.
So I want to talk about those a little bit, because those are...
Have you played any of them?
I have. And Kyle, have you played any Ubisoft open
I'm
world
a
games?
Ubisoft defender.
I have not. I have not, actually. And I won't go too much down this path, because I think you guys will probably correct me here in a second.
Some of them, though, right?
I honestly don't remember the last one.
Have you played any of the Far Cries?
Nope.
Assassin's Creed?
Not even 3?
No Assassin's Creed, no Far Cry.
Not even 3?
Nope.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I played the Rabbids games. Does that count?
There should be an open world Rabbids game.
I'm actually surprised. I guess Rayman 3 was kind of open world, but that's a BR before Rabbids, so don't really count that. No, but like, honestly, one of the things that's kept me away from those games has been that there's like just like too much going on. There's too much on the HUD. There's too many side quests. So you're getting constant pop-ups. Go this way, do that.
I'm going to sound like a hypocrite, because I just criticized the temples, even though they mechanically act, like you said, as something to do everywhere. I actually think that Ubisoft games go so hard into their stuff to do everywhere that it kind of just removes the problem for me. It's like I'm never gonna
numb.
I'm gonna like with Tears of the Kingdom, I can realistically expect to do everything in the game, or at least all the shrines, at least all the core stuff, right? With a Ubisoft game, unless I have absolutely no life, I'm not going to be able to do all the things. And to me, it's to that point where now it's freeing. Now I'm like, I'm not going to do all this stuff, so I'll only do the stuff that I like to do.
But Stuart, I have no life, and that's why I can't do this.
So start playing Ubisoft games.
but I didn't come up with this word, but I heard someone kind of refer to the Ubisoft Monogame.
Yeah.
Because they make a lot of things, they publish a lot of things, but they specifically have a coterie of open world games that are all kind of structured the same. I think they all have different engines, they're different brands, but like the Ubisoft open world game is like a specific thing. And if you play enough of these, you understand what that is. And the part of that is most, I guess the element of that that's most obvious in Breath of the Wild is climbing up towers to open parts of the map. Essentially, that is the structure, is like you are plopped into some open world, and you have sections of the map that are like settlements or things that you have to take and plant a flag in. You can do side missions and drive cars and wield all kinds of different weapons. They'll have some variation, like in the Watch Dogs game, there's hacking stuff. In the Tom Clancy games, it's more like military specific stuff. Just the aesthetic is different, and the environment where it takes place is different. But it's just like the maps on these things are enormous. And the ones that I played a little bit of Assassin's Creed 2 way back when on Steam, just to kind of fool around with it. But I came in the middle of the Far Cry series, and those are the ones I want to talk about with you specifically, Stuart, because I know that you and I are more experienced with that, and maybe we'll try to sell Kyle on at least some of them. But Far Cry 1...
Welcome to Selling Kyle on Ubisoft Games, the podcast.
Yeah, because Far Cry 1 is not really... That's more wide linear, I believe. That's not really an open world game, is it?
I mean, Far Cry 1 is like basically Crysis, but not.
Yeah.
It uses the same engine.
Because Crysis, same situation. And I played that a little bit too. That's like, you have a very large path you are following, but
it's wide linear.
It's creative. And then Far Cry 2, I hear that one's pretty
good.
I hear it's pretty good.
Good.
My understanding, and
it's the most grounded of the
series.
And
feel free to jump in with your take on it. But my understanding is that it is very dark and gritty, but like it has a point, and
it might still be my favorite, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Far Cry 2 is a story about African blood diamonds. Basically, at the end of the day,
is Elon Musk a character?
No, that's emeralds.
Oh, right, blood emeralds.
No, blood diamonds.
Yes.
So yeah, it's basically that. It's basically. I'm not going to spoil the story, but it's essentially like you're dealing with the blood diamond trade and sort of all of the various factions and people that are involved in it in various different ways. And you notably, one of the things that people are most irritated by is you contract malaria, which isn't a spoiler, it happens immediately. But you contract malaria and you have to deal with managing your malaria symptoms throughout the game. So it's much more grounded, where it's like this stuff happens. Blood diamonds are bad. People are terrible, and they like kill each other for the to profit off of this. And malaria is a thing. Diseases are a thing. It's it definitely is far more grounded. And although it does have some wacky stuff, I mean, it's a Far Cry game at the end of the day, but it's definitely a hard left into let's make Far Cry, but as realistic and grounded. And maybe not as dark as possible, but pretty dark. I mean, it's blood diamonds. Like, there's like slavery and stuff happening, and it's pretty dark. But it's great as a result. Like, I do like the wackiness of Far Cry, later Far Cries, but it really caught me off guard with like trying to tell an earnest story of something that actually happens in the world. And yeah, it's unrealistic, I get it. It's not perfect representation of reality, but it's trying. And it tried at a pretty early time in gaming. Like, this isn't, this is many, many, many years before these like prestige story games that are around in the last, 5 or so. So telling
2009, 8?
Yeah, about there. I don't remember the exact year, but about there. And yeah, so this was pretty early for like telling a grounded, like, we're gonna look at blood diamonds as a game story mechanic. Like, that's who does that?
Yeah,
and especially for something that started as like this wacky tropical, like, let's blow up random people on a tropical island series. Like,
sounds a little woke to me, to be honest. Well, remember politics?
Yes, no, different podcast. But Far Cry 3. Now, I believe that was kind of a turning point for the series.
Far Cry 3 was a turning point.
My impression, I'm coming at this, backwards, but my impression is that was really where it kind of got a lot of the mechanics that it has now and the tone that it has now.
Yeah, 3, as you said, was the turning point to being wackier and weirder and tower opening the map based and hang gliding
wingsuits.
and yeah.
So you guys mentioned wacky, you mentioned weird. Someone like me who's kind of uninitiated to the Far Cry series, like what makes their brand of open world sort of unique and a Far Cry game?
Well, I think so. Just again to kind of explain my credentials, the first one I played was Far Cry 5, and I started.
That was the first one.
It was the first one I played. I just thought it was conceptually interesting.
Interesting.
I'll tell you what put me off from the games for a while, and then I'll tell you how that's partly true and partly false. Is I did look at 3, 4, the ones that I was aware. I became aware of the series with 3 and 4, and I just looked at them at the time, and I was like, is this supposed to be funny or like I couldn't get the tone. And then the 5th one happened. I'm sorry, I like the idea of like shooting up a cult that's taking over a town. I just thought that was neat. It's set in like Montana or whatever, like it's America. Like it's a game.
Montana.
It was a series that like up until that time was like exotic settings, and it's like, oh, it's America. And like I'm not like a Red Dawn guy, but I kind of like the idea of like, someone kind of described these games as like a murder vacation, and and that's sort of what it is. Like you go to a beautiful exotic place and you just put holes in people, and there's but you can do other stuff too. But like
I'm assuming it's justified, by the way.
Oh, it is, and
Yes or no?
and we'll get to that in a second.
That's
but I enjoyed it, and so I went back and I played Primal. Primal.
As your second one.
Well, I don't remember if it was my. This was a couple years ago.
You had the weirdest introduction to Far Cry.
This was a pandemic thing for me. Like I was switching jobs, and the pandemic happened. And I was like, well, this is a great way for me to just while away my time. So
it's escapism.
It's 5. Yeah, I started 5. I started 5, and then I don't think I got around to the DLC until later. But I did get around to Primal. That return to Monkey. It's a caveman open world game basically, and
it's also great.
I think
conceptually,
it's the most interesting, just because again that's weird. Like you have guns and vehicles and
they went hard on it, so much harder than they needed to, like developing languages and stuff. Like
and they have specific like. It's not just like all cavemen. Like there's different tribes. There's one tribe that like is clearly kind of Cro-Magnon adjacent. They're a bit more brutal.
It's Cro-Magnon.
I'm sorry. Yes, they are a French developer. I should do them right. I should do them right with that pronunciation. And then there's another tribe that's like sun worshippers, but they're like more technological. And you get into the mindset of like a caveman. You're like, oh, they got elevators, like or like rock. Like they're just like but one tribe is more advanced and one tribe is, and in your tribe is like kind of in the middle, like kind of what are probably our ancestors. And you can skin animals and throw spears and arrows. And that. So I thought that was interesting. But the thing about the Far Cry games that I came to realize, and again, this is kind of where like story versus gameplay, ludonarrative dissonance kind of butts up. Every single one of the games includes the new gameplay developments from the previous game, but when those things were introduced, they had a specific purpose to do with that story, and I don't like that. Like I think that if you took these features out, people would riot because like, oh man, they have less to do, there's less whatever. But Far Cry 3, you get a wingsuit, it's a part of the story.
Yes,
and like they make a whole thing out of this.
It's a big deal when you get it.
Yeah, and it's fun because like up until that point you haven't been able to travel this freely. And then in Far Cry, I don't know about 4, but I know about got 5, you just unlock it as a perk within the first 5 minutes. It's just like oh, it's Far Cry, you gotta have a wingsuit now.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is there's mountains in that game, but it's Montana, so there's not a lot of stuff to jump off of compared to 3 or 4. And then in Primal, it's like, oh, you're a caveman, you're in touch with nature, you can train animals. And then in 5 and 6, and we'll get to 6 in a second, you can just do that. You can just summon animals, you can just train animals, like it's cute, whatever. I'm not trying to like go Neil deGrasse Tyson on this, but it had a thematic specific point and reason why you were doing that, and then now it's just like a thing that you do.
They tried to at least integrate the animals in 5, like into the characters.
I mean, they make sense for the setting that you're in.
Yeah,
and they make sense. I mean, they don't just like teleport in out of nowhere, but like there was a conceptual reason why that was. They worked it into the story.
Yeah,
and similarly in 3, there's a whole thing about like drugs and hallucinogens and whatever. And now it's like every game, it's like, oh, here's the part where you get high. It's like, what's the drug gonna be in the new Far Cry game? It's like,
the weed burning sequence in 3 is legendary.
I mean, again, but like they start off with these high points.
Fun.
They start off.
Good.
They start off like introducing these things as like,
and it plays Skrillex, and it's like so of the era,
as was the style of the time.
Era.
But another thing story wise that the Far Cry games do, that they've kind of become, they have decided that they are known for, I guess, is having charismatic villains.
Yes,
with good performances.
Like Giancarlo Esposito.
And so 3, I didn't know the dude.
Arguably since 2, but really since 3.
I didn't know the dude at the time, but I think Michael Mando was his name. He plays Voss.
Yeah.
The guy on the cover, if you've seen that at least. And then I don't know the actor's name in 4, but the guy who plays, who's the villain in 4? What's his name?
Pagan Min.
Pagan Min. Okay, yeah. He's again just like perform. Like I love it. I mean, you watch enough James Bond action movies, whatever. You love a good villain performance with a good actor. The last couple of these games, I really have not cared for, and I think that's what we're going to kind of combine, talking about story and about what makes a good open world game, bad open world game. But I like it best when there are some limits. There are some. If you are able to do absurd things, I don't need everything to like make logical sense, but they add so much stuff to the Far Cry games to make them so free that it's almost I feel like there's no stakes. You can summon a plane, just go to a little thing and it just appears. So you fly it and you crash it and you jump out. I know we were kind of talking about weapon durability, but there's consequences there. Like I mean, in the Far Cry games, there's like no consequences, and you can just kind of do whatever the heck you want. And if that sounds fun, that's great. Yeah. But then it's like, okay, well, why do I care about any of this?
They've gotten away from that over time. There were definitely more consequences earlier on. They were usually story based. They weren't truly in gameplay. They were a result of what happens in the story, but they've gotten away from that. I will say that I don't entirely hate that. Like, if I was to sell somebody on Far Cry like as a concept, I would say it's a game that does a great job of sucking you in and bringing you along on this. Like, there's really serious stuff, there's really brutal stuff, there's really wacky, funny stuff, and for some reason, tonally, it all works, at least in my opinion. Like you as playing it, you don't believe it. There's no like ludonarrative dissonance to me. It's like, this is totally, if you take each of these things individually, it's totally ridiculous. But for some reason, they hit the balance to me, and like it all kind of, I accept it. Like I'm just like, okay, I'm willing to accept whatever you're putting in front of me, and I don't really know how they do that, but they do. In my opinion.
I would just say they're games that give you a lot to do, but if you, I don't want to say they don't give you a sense of accomplishment because that's not fair. But again, like you pretty much, at least for the last couple of games, pretty much immediately you can just pay and like just unlock any vehicle, and as a user interface thing, this is maybe super petty, but like you can go through the menu and there are like little like this, it just shows you what like all the things in the game that you can get are. They just don't like maybe that
there's no reveal.
I mean you reveal the map, but like I like learning about things, or like gaining enough money to get like, oh, I can't get this vehicle but now I can.
Like I didn't like that the animal companions, they didn't show you their picture, but it was like, it was like they were in a shadow, and you could definitely tell what animal it is. And it's like, it would have been better if that was a surprise.
I could just not look through the menu, but it's like, again, I'm the kind of person where it's like I want.
Who's not going to look?
I just look through. It's like, oh, here's all the materials you can get in the game. Here's all the weapons, and I can just teleport kind of wherever the heck I want, and I don't feel. I feel too powerful almost.
So it's actually a perfect point of transition that you just said. I feel too powerful, and I think that, not to constantly bring things back to Tears of the Kingdom, but it's topical, and we can
current events,
current events. Both with you talking about the glider, different types of transportation and mobility in the Far Cry series, it sounds like there's a lot of options. Some maybe a little too easy, and these options to kind of fast travel and teleport. Tears of the Kingdom had a similar thing where you get the glider early on, but Breath of the Wild had that too. And the fast travel, especially when you find a bunch of shrines, becomes so convenient. I mean, I pretty much never went anywhere without fast traveling first. Is there a point where you kind of cross that line to where your open world game gives you so much mobility and ease of access to where it actually makes you not want to explore and be in that world because you can just zip around?
I want to talk about two opposing extremes. And the first one, you're going to have to stop me from getting down a rabbit hole on this because I love it so much. Death Stranding. I would call that an open world game, but again, you earn every literal step. And what happens is, as you go, you literally build a network and you make it easier to get back to where you were before, and other players too. So I would say, in a way, that's a game where like you make it an open world game. And again, love that game. We can go into detail about it now or another time. But the opposite end of the spectrum, Far Cry 6, something about that irritated me more than any of the things that I've described was something I didn't expect, is that from the beginning of the game, you can fast travel anywhere.
Oh,
you can fast travel to the gates of the final boss.
Yet. How does that work?
You just go to the map and you just do it. And I don't know if I didn't notice this at first or if they added it for some ridiculous reason. But as petty as it sounds, that just turned me off of the game because I was like, oh, I could just go anywhere. Like, I mean, yeah, you have to, like, if you're going to get blasted if you don't have the right weapons and whatever, and like there's story events that you have to trigger. But again, we talk about exploration. I love exploring in games. I love being the one who puts one foot in front of the other and gets there. And even if you are climbing a tower and it's kind of silly and cliche, you make those clouds disappear. You plan that. Yeah, you earn it. And then it's like, oh, so I can just pull up the menu and just teleport anywhere. Well, Far Cry New Dawn, I don't know if it's one of the worst games
I haven't played it yet.
I don't know if it's one of the worst. You're not missing a thing. I don't know if it's one of the worst games I've ever played, but I feel like it's definitely Ubisoft's Far Cry 76, where it's like, how little can we care? How shameful can we get?
It's a low blow.
Because Kyle, I mean, do you care if I spoil the end of Far Cry 5?
Go for it. Viewers, look out.
Okay, so spoilers for Far Cry 5. At the end of Far Cry 5, again, it's kind of weird, tonal, nihilistic, whatever. The whole game, you're fighting this cult that like thinks the world is going to end, and it does. An apocalyptic, like a nuclear bomb goes off, and the end of the game, it's like a cinematic part where you're in a car. The world is basically ending, like a nuclear holocaust. And
so it is quite literally a Fallout game, essentially.
Yes, yeah. So at the end of that game, it's kind of this ending is like you're stuck in a bunker with like the main cult guy, and then the sequel. It's a direct sequel. Far Cry New Dawn is a direct sequel that takes place in the post-apocalypse of Far Cry 5's world, and you are playing a different character. And the character from the first game actually is a character in this game, but since in Far Cry 5, they don't have a name or a gender. It's just because it's like self-insert. Yeah. So they're just called Rook. It's like a rookie cop. So there's this, I guess, gender-neutral person in a mask that doesn't talk, but is also a character. It's super weird. But like, anyway, it is the same overworld as Far Cry 5, and they've kind of, messed it up, made it post-apocalyptic. And there's like base building mechanics and stuff. So like, the structure is there, but it's just a lot shorter.
But none of the quaint 50s music or
no, it's just
like
a lot shorter and
punk
cheaper.
robots.
And the thing that really just chafed me was you can buy with in-game currency and I think also real money perk upgrades, which is I think that you can use like in-game stuff or just do it naturally, but it's like and they just keep going up like this. It's just like percent. I think you could probably break the game because it's just like percentage buff increases on like whatever abilities and stuff.
So it's a pay-to-win game, but it's PvE.
Basically. Well, and I never really felt like I needed. Well, I'm not going to say I didn't feel like I needed to use it because there were parts. It's basically Far Cry Mad Max, which is a great idea in theory. And again, it's all there. The flashy villains, the whatever. I do like the look of the world. It's very like a lot of purples and yellows, and there's makeshift weapons. Like the parts are all there, but it really was just like, okay, we're just going to reuse the same overworld. We're going to have you pay for upgrades. I don't know. Maybe you would have a different impression of it coming at it from a different angle. But for someone who liked the fifth one so much, or I mean, I didn't love it, but like I enjoyed it a lot. I played it a lot, and then just to have this be the direct follow up. And then it really just kind of set me up for it, because that's why when 6 was coming out, okay, new game, new world, we got Giancarlo Esposito, can't lose. And that was a situation where it sucked in ways that were unprecedented and unexpected to me. But like again, Ubisoft, they have a template, and that's to me that's what makes a bad open world game, is where you do them over and over to the point where even if the world is different, they all blur together. And I think that
I think Far Cry needs its Assassin's Creed Origins moment. And they need to take a year off or 2 years off or whatever and reimagine the series. Mm-hmm. Now, I realize that Assassin's Creed is now getting, I haven't played Valhalla, but I realize it is now redoing itself yet again post Valhalla, because Valhalla kind of sucked from what I understand.
Mirage is the next one, right?
Mirage, and it's supposed to be a lot closer to the like OGs, like that's sort of a throwback. But I feel like Far Cry needs that. They need to like take a year off and rethink the formula. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah,
putting a pin on it, I think like play 2, 3, Primal, and 5 and ignore the rest.
What would be the one that would be sort of like my best entry point to the series if I was going to try it?
I still think 3's the best entry point for me personally, but you could argue 5's a good entry point.
Because I would say, like, having played them backwards and kind of out of order, if you play 3 and then play the others, you will notice the changes and improvements in a way that I kind of came at backwards. Now, are there any open world games we haven't talked about that you want to shout out that you think are kind of overrated, underrated, something different than what we discussed?
I have one.
Assassin's Creed's obvious, but go for it.
Yeah, I have one that's been on my mind this entire discussion, and it actually came to mind first when we were discussing story. Red Dead Redemption 2.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. I have not played. Well, excuse me. I played Red Dead Redemption 2 first. Then I went back and I played Red Dead Redemption, and
that's what I also did.
Yeah, it was hard to play. I'll be honest, because it's an older game. But holy cow, that game's story! I can't like think of another game where I was so like engrossed in what was happening at the end of the game. I felt like I was so personally identifying with the character's experience. No, I'm not like a reformed gunman or whatever, but I felt so deeply for how they created and fleshed out that character. And I'll be honest, I was like tearing up at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It was a powerful game for me.
Yeah, and
the horse scene, man.
Well, because I didn't play it until a couple years after it came out, and again at the time I was like, I'm not really a Rockstar guy. I'm not really a cowboy guy. I did finally get around to it after you recommended it, and the most of the planet recommended it.
Yeah.
And I would say it's the
after Kyle and I were like, play it.
You have to play this game.
It's the kind of game. It's the kind of and I'll go into my thoughts on it.
The controls suck.
Well, I didn't have a problem with it necessarily.
So many times I accidentally shot my gun off and like killed someone or like freaked people out.
Yeah.
Sorry, go for it.
Yeah,
but I think it's the kind of game where I didn't necessarily have that extreme of a reaction to it, but it's almost like I don't think that it matters how I feel about it because it is one of the most astounding games ever made. It's almost like my opinion on the Mona Lisa. Like, who cares what I think about the Mona Lisa? It's the Mona Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Too small. That's my opinion on the Mona Lisa. It's too small.
That's how I feel, and that is absolutely a compliment. Is it's like this game is so titanic. It's just like it's so large. I mean, we talk about scope. Good grief! I mean, you're across half of a fictional part of the country. The graphics are great. I mean, again, perfect example of like mixing story and like side quests and being able to pick stuff up and put it down. It has like acts and phases and time passes and all these characters that have like these distinct.
And all of the
personalities.
acting is phenomenal.
It is great.
Really good acting.
It is like some of the best of any game.
Yeah, and I think it's a great setting for that because I talking about open world games we haven't played, I've never really been that interested in the GTA games. I know they have a big fan base. I'm just not. I know it's more than this. I'm not Jack Thompson up here. I'm just not really interested in playing like a criminal. Like I know it's about that. That sounds kind of reductive when I say it that way, but like I don't. The fantasy that those games present is not something that really interests me. Even though I play games where you murder the population of an entire country. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just the framing of it, and I think that like the Wild West is a really great setting for that.
And the decline of the Wild West specifically is really interesting.
Yeah, industrialization.
Yeah, and I'm gonna cite my sources here. Noah Gervais, fantastic YouTube game essayist. He kind of made a great point where he said that westerns were westerns were a genre that were incredibly common and easy for films to do because you could just head out to the desert by LA and just shoot. Mm-hmm. But video games, it's been harder because they do, in a way, command an open world because the thrill, what made Americans specifically fall in love with Westerns is that feeling of exploration and grandeur.
Wide open spaces.
Yeah, and some of those games do more than others to unpack, the political reality of that, but at the end of the day, the fantasy is like, go out there and do this. Like, make it your own. And what better place to do that than a video game and an open world video game specifically?
This is probably already, whatever Red Dead Redemption 3 is probably already been decided. But I'm just going to throw this out there. This has been an idea of mine for like 15 years.
Huh?
There should be a Alaskan gold rush game set between Seattle or at least Western Washington and Alaska. Like there was some crazy stuff that went down, like both in Alaska and in Seattle supporting the efforts of the gold rush. Like there's so many interesting stories and characters, and it would be even worse than Red Dead Redemption 2 because it wouldn't be fun at all. It would be 100% like basically a TV show character study, like even worse than Red Dead Redemption. But oh boy, would it be awesome.
That kind of brings me to something else I suppose one would consider an open world game that also incorporates things in a similar way as Ghost of Tsushima.
I was just about to say that.
Yes.
Other open world games we have. Ghost of Tsushima.
Another great story.
Speaking of amazing stories,
I
didn't hit quite as hard as Red Dead Redemption 2, I will admit, but holy crap, it is so good.
Well, the part for me was I had never played, and maybe one exists, I had never played a game where the stealth system was canonically relevant, if that makes sense. Because again, speaking of Far Cry games, so many like open world games are like Horizon Zero Dawn. Oh, you can go in the grass and you can sneak up on enemies. And it's fun to have that option, but there's not like a morality system where if there is one, it doesn't really matter like to the plot. Like how you act doesn't really influence the plot. And there is a linear narrative in Ghost of Tsushima, so you can argue it doesn't matter there either. But like it is an actual moral dilemma for the main character because he is trained to not do that.
Yeah,
and the whole plot is about him choosing to fight stealthily and feeling really conflicted about that.
Yep. Not being honorable.
Yeah.
It's I wish they went harder for it. Like to be honest, like it's hard for me to criticize Ghost of Tsushima because it's so good, but I wish there were like more gameplay consequences either way. I mean, I know there are some, like, if you approach some settlement, you can do the whole samurai thing and maybe you get a little bit of an edge where you take out some, heavyweight guy really quickly if you're good at the game. Whereas with stealth, you can, pick them off and make it easier. I get it, but I wish there was something just a little bit more. Like, it wasn't quite enough for me. I got the struggle, I got the narrative, but the moment-to-moment gameplay, there was no consequence. There was nothing mechanical that was like, it didn't feel like, let me put it this way. It didn't feel like Jin cared during the moment-to-moment gameplay. I know that sounds dumb because I'm controlling him, but like, there's no, you can be a samurai, you can be a ninja-ish equivalent, and as far as moving around the environment and interacting with the characters and stuff, nothing really happens. It's only told in story beats, and I get why they had to do it that way, but I just like, I mean, even some little voice line about him being conflicted as you're approaching a camp, or him muttering to himself or muttering to a character that he's with about like, we can't, and this happened occasionally, very occasionally though.
Yeah.
But we have to do this. We have to take the stealthy approach because we have a greater purpose, and my honor is less important than accomplishing this goal. If there was a little bit more of that into the moment-to-moment gameplay, it would have sold it to me a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's the trick of it, is like I don't want to be flippant and just have my response to all of these conversations be like, oh, well, what can you do? But it's like, I mean, I don't know how you would do it. But like, if he's talking to himself all the time, then we kind of get the Horizon situation where
I understand.
This person is just every second they gotta have something to say, and like that, it gets really annoying.
Yeah. No,
and it's kind of belaboring the point. I mean, but at the same time,
not a perfect suggestion, I realize.
But you're absolutely right, because
I still missed it for whatever it's
because
worth.
if you just like bury the needle at the other end of the spectrum and have like a true open world free whatever, well, there's no story. Can you do whatever? Then you're just playing Postal, whereas you're just being an awful person and doing whatever the heck you want. There's no plot. Is there a sequel to that coming out?
I think so.
It's a movie, yes. Again, that's another. We'll talk about that another day. I don't think that's necessary. I do think it's in good hands. I want to say Chance Stahelski, who we're talking about John Wick movies, I think is involved in it in some capacity.
I hope the guy who played Jin is cast as Jin because he was so good. Like,
well, they have some Hollywood actors in the game.
Yeah, but like, I hope he's actually. I hope they like take a lot of them and just are like, cool, you're in the movie now.
Yeah,
because they're all so good.
Yeah,
and they did motion capture, so like they could do it.
What the heck? Yeah,
they've already done it.
So we have Chris Pratt play him though. Is the question.
What are some game franchises or like that you have not had an open world game but you think would do well, or like what are some concepts that you have not seen explored in an open world game that you think would be interesting?
Real quick, Donkey Kong. I am flabbergasted that we have not got an open world Donkey Kong game. I would love it to be a beat 'em up, almost like Wario World. You're swinging through the trees, you're exploring DK Isle, but it's
beat 'em up game. I like the sound of that.
Closest thing we've got was Donkey Kong 64,
which was kind of. I mean, you're going into paintings,
large wide linear. That's wide linear.
Again, that's the distinction we talked about before. Large hub world game, not necessarily the same thing.
So I said the closest, not.
It's spokes on. It's the difference between spokes on a wheel and a sphere.
Yeah.
But I would have a heck of a time with that. I mean, if you wanted to do fast travel, you could have Funky Kong with his plane. You're getting around the different places. But you're exploring different biomes in the way that Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze have done it. Because those games have inspired world design.
Yeah.
But it's restricted to a side-scroller.
Well, let me ask you a question. You played more of these, so you tell me, has there been a Pokemon open world game?
Sort of.
I guess. I mean, not
Legends. We're talking about Legends, right? Pokemon Legends.
And then Scarlet and Violet. Legends a little bit less so. Scarlet and Violet, I would say, I hesitate to say definitely, but close. It's the closest that Pokemon has been to a true open world game thus far. It just sucks for so many reasons.
I have not played. I have not.
I don't want to give it a
played-
win.
I'm not. But that's and that kind of brings us back, full circle. Like again, all the Pokemon games, arguably like a large open world.
Yeah.
But we don't really consider those open world games. We consider them RPGs, and I think that it is again about not just having like a path that you follow in a circle. There's got to be things in the middle that you're doing.
Even the OG Pokemon becomes like you have to unlock it. Like there's a linear progression through the world the first time, but once it's unlocked, it's open world.
Well, the post game. I mean, the post game. Yeah.
I think, and again, this is a separate discussion on how Game Freak is sort of permanently rooted in the past with how they approach their game design. But if you look at the games and how they haven't changed since the structure of the originals in many respects. Boy, did they have some funny ways of getting you to stay on that linear path in an otherwise open world. You could go to some place and there's just like a line of dudes who are just dancing.
Yeah.
And they're like we just won't get out of the way until you beat the gym leader. Or be like, eat this rage candy bar.
But that's,
you don't want it? I'm not moving.
But that's been a thing since the beginning.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Like the old man, like, I don't want to. I'm laying here, so you can't
that goes back
move.
to what I was saying is I think that stagnation for an open world game, if you're making like a bunch of open world games that are very similar, yeah, they can be fun, but eventually it's like, okay, I get how this works. I get what's going on. What else have you got for me?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that there are ways that Pokemon could do that. I think things I have seen of Pokemon Legends make me see the potential there to like creep up on stuff.
It just needs a better developer.
The skeleton of it is there, and I think that's absolutely good. Is that it's the hands that it's in. I mean, even the Zelda games, they got an assist from Monolith Soft. I think it's the people that are working on it. I don't want to get circular logic like an open world game is whatever everyone calls an open world game, but I think that we have kind of developed a consensus of what that means, and so the reason we don't go back and call like Pokemon Red an open world game is not because it doesn't have an open world, whether you agree with that or not, but because there is like a template for this stuff, and it has mostly been established by Ubisoft and by Rockstar for that matter.
Sort of a template, but I would argue that there is an established template in many ways, but I'd argue that one, that shouldn't be the case anymore, and two, there are games like Subnautica that are open world games that totally buck that template entirely.
That's true. Underwater stuff.
Now that's open world survival, but it's still open world. It is a map that you can access anything from the beginning, basically. Like it is a giant map. Yeah. Anything is accessible.
I'm glad you mentioned survival.
It's only parts are only inaccessible by through mechanic reasons. Like, you're not artificially gated. It just depends on how you progress through the game and how you want to progress.
And I'm glad you mentioned survival because I think that's a niche that I have neglected to acknowledge now. We've been talking about narrative-driven open world games. Survival,
or like action adventure,
but there are a lot, and I don't really play a lot of these because I just don't really like them that much, but I do tip my hat to the fact that there are a lot of survival games that take place in open worlds, and that is in service of that concept. Now, we've all, off the air here, played The Forest. I'd call that an open world game.
Yeah, it's a small open world,
but
it's definitely open world. The big one for me recently has been Valheim.
Yes.
Valheim, I've put so many hours in with my friends, and that's a legit open world. I mean, you're exploring all kinds of biomes, you're sailing the seas. I mean, there is a ton that you're getting out of that open world experience, and the crafting is actually kind of what I was talking about earlier with the Zelda games, to where they really force you to take advantage, almost to a fault, of using limited resources to even allow you to explore. So there's that dimension as well.
Yeah, and I think
is Minecraft a survival game?
It's I would say it's open world survival.
It's procedurally. I would say it's procedurally generated open world. I mean, we're showing our age. We got this far without even talking about Minecraft as an open world game. I think that it really is. I mean, we're
not showing our age.
Well, but I mean, like, for someone
I was playing it in the alpha.
Well, I mean, I was too. But like people who grew up with that, Zoomers have like a different connection to it than we do. Let's accept that. But I think that is the very fact that I didn't think of those things, again, to me speaks to like what I think of when I say open world game. Is that my brain skips sandbox games and skips like survival games, and I hate to say it, but Fortnite's kind of an open world game too. I don't play it, but from what I know of it, but you have like a map. Like, I mean, let's not be prejudiced here. I mean, like,
I'm not prejudiced. I'm saying it genuinely is not, in my opinion. It is a. I mean, it's a battle royale. Like, that's different.
Yeah, but you're absolutely. But okay, but I mean, that was a trick question.
Open world.
Well, that was a trick question, and you passed, because what I'm saying is like, again, like I said, just having an open world is not enough. What are you doing in that open world?
Yeah.
And I think that action adventure RPG games, they lend themselves to exploration. Like, no, I mean, I'm sure some kid is doing this, but like, I don't think anyone's running around Fortnite like
Fortnite is a time limit. Like, you've got a time to defeat all these other people.
Because a bunch of shooters will have maps.
Yeah.
And you can run around, but it's not like there's a clock and you're going to get shot in the head if you don't shoot someone in the head first. So, I mean, I jumped the gun on that, but you're absolutely right, and I think that it's not just about the setting.
You could argue if it was an indefinite time limit. I think the map, the Fortnite map is too small, in my opinion. Now, I get it's probably like the same size as the Force. Somebody's going to call me out, but like, to me, mechanically, it feels too small, even if it's not physically, so to speak, too small.
Yeah.
But two, there's a time limit. Like, what would be interesting is there's a battle royale, but it's indefinite time limit, and it's like a giant open world.
I think it'd be kind of funny to have a game where you think it's just like this simulation thing. It's like this little small town, and then like you can like just you feel like you're sequence breaking, but like there's like this whole curated world out there, or like that, like you do a battle royale game, but like the timer stops, but then like it doesn't end. It maybe can be kind of creepy, but it's just like I'm stuck on this map, and like all of a sudden you find a cave, and there's like you think it's one like simple kind of game, and then it becomes this other thing. I would love to see that.
That would be impossible for corporations to take a risk on. Though,
exactly,
because you couldn't market.
It would have to be. It would have
to market it
because
as
I've
such
played
a
a lot of
experience.
indie games that take those,
secret.
and that's exactly, and that kind
it
of
would have to be indie.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we're talking about. Like we're talking about open world games as a concept. But this is probably one of the biggest kinds of games there is now. I mean, I know battle royales are big now, but like again, Ubisoft, they are a titanic company. They make a ton of these things. This is a very popular form of game because of all the things we've just described, for better or worse.
Are MMOs an open world game?
I'm glad you mentioned that. So I don't play. I would argue that they're probably the most open world game because
like
they
World of
essentially.
Warcraft,
yeah, I mean, we talk about where are lines blurring in genres. Is an open world game? Does it have to be single player?
Or because you can have like Valheim's co-op, and that's definitely
open world. Co-op.
Is it the live service element? Is it the fact that it's this running thing of new events and stuff, or does that have to be a curated singular location?
But that's fine. Like I feel like the live service thing is the same. This sounds really weird, but the same idea as the shrines in Breath of the Wild: Tears of the Kingdom. Like it's just the way of doing that for an MMO. That's how you constantly have stuff to do. Eventually, players will run out of stuff to do if they have no life, and you've got to keep giving them stuff to do to keep them around, especially if it's a monthly payment one. Yeah. So you have stuff. You have stuff that it gets added.
Because as we've been talking about it, I mean, I don't want to shoehorn it into one kind of game, but the more we talk about it, the more I really do feel like almost open world is like a subset of the action adventure genre because you do other things. Any of you guys play The Witness? That puzzle game? Mm-hmm. It not great. Don't worry about it. That's like you're on like an enormous island that you can go around on. And yeah, there are gated parts, but it is a puzzle game. Yeah. And you're walking around it in first person doing stuff, and like Myst, for example. Like you can choose where you go, and it's a large world, but like it is so segmented. I wouldn't call that an open world game because the primary thing that you are doing in the game is solving puzzles. Yeah. And I would say the primary thing that you were doing in Fortnite is building. I mean, I'm 31. I don't know what the primary thing is these days, but like the
dances.
Yes, you're flossing. The primary thing is flossing. The primary thing is not giving intellectual property credit to Carlton from Family Matters or Fresh Prince or whatever. Anyway. I didn't have television growing up, but the primary thing that you were doing in an open world game is there's a story, but like I would say it is a matter of intent on the part of a developer because if anybody could I'm sure this exists. I don't know if it does, but like a computer program, it's like a simulation, like a real estate, like touring a neighborhood or a house. Mm-hmm. A person could choose to treat that like an open world game to be funny or whatever, but like that's not the point of it. I think it's a matter of intent in a way. It's like this is supposed. Mm-hmm. It incentivizes that exploration. You're like, you were here, now go here. Now
is Microsoft Flight Simulator an open world game?
I'm honestly
possibly the most.
I mean, good grief. I mean, it's about as open as I don't think you get more open world than that. But again, it's like the purpose of it. It's simulational. All games are simulational, but like, I feel like doing stuff, as pedantic as that sounds, is like like you just fly around. You don't.
Is No Man's Sky an open world game?
Open universe game.
Again, that kind of goes back to what we said about like why linear. Like if it's like bubbles on a chain, like I talked about they got that new Star Wars Outlaws open world game, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. When you go onto these planets, especially on Jedi Survivor that I've been playing recently, there are parts of it where it is very like you have a lot of stuff that you can do, but I see that more as again like Breath of the Wild versus Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess has Hyrule Field and there's all these different things you can go off and do, but I see that again spokes on a wheel. I don't see that as like. I'm not saying that an open world game has to have a map that's square or circular, but it kind of does because it's like otherwise you are just following rails and you are just going off like here's this part, here's this part, here's this part, but you always have to come back through this area. And I think that open world games not only allow you to do things in a different order, like the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild, or the cult leaders in Far Cry 5. I think that it openly like encourages and incentivizes you to jump around, and that's why fast travel systems are so important in these games because the point of it is you are not retracing your steps like Metroid or something, but like you are incentivized. You have to and you want to go back to places you've been before and explore things you didn't do before, and like now I have this fishing rod or this weapon. Let's see what I can do with it here.
Interesting. Is Satisfactory an open world game?
I don't know. Building stuff. I mean, again, just Yeah.
SimCity. Yeah.
Sims, simulational games. Again, let's draw a line and say just because there's a lot of just because the map is big and just because there's a lot of stuff to do doesn't make it an open world game.
So we've talked a lot about what open world games are.
Yeah.
And are not to some degree. But what are open world games missing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of pivots, that kind of connects to what I was saying about things that could be added. I think something that would be really good if we can get there, let's start bringing in VR. And I think that No Man's Sky has a bit of that. I know we were kind of on the fence a second ago whether or not that's an open world game, but I think the exploration and immersion are such a key part. At least having an optional
Half-Life Alex, but the entire City 17 is open to you.
Yeah.
Whoa, that would be
and I mean, and I know that
amazing.
we've not really talked about Bethesda games, which is maybe some people might think is a bit of a
We
blind
talked about
spot.
Oblivion.
I just didn't quite take a shine to them. I think they're just rather sloppy. I know that Skyrim is Skyrim. There's nothing I can say about it
Skyrim's
that hasn't
fine.
already been said. But I think that those I do want to tip my hat to those games and say those are absolutely obviously open world games. Obviously they have a devoted fan base and they are at least in scope impressive. They're not really my cup of tea, but I think I want to acknowledge them because it wouldn't be right to have to talk about this and not talk about Bethesda games. I'm sorry. What were you saying before?
Saying what are open world games missing?
Missing, yeah. So I think VR. Yeah, no, I think that, or at least having an option to do VR, accommodating that, allowing you to feel that. I think there are a lot of games that have optional VR features these days. There are some that are exclusive.
So just to interject real quick, there are some open world games that currently have VR. One of them I've only experienced through my old Samsung phone. Yeah. But there is a Minecraft VR.
That's right.
You can play, and I can tell
there
you
are actually
right
multiple
now,
versions of it.
Yeah. And it is it's a very different experience. I remember like at one point. Because I'm not the biggest fan of swimming, and I'm kind of at odds, I guess, with Stuart.
And yet
when it
you
comes
want
to water.
underwater areas in the next Zelda game.
That's right. I can fantasize about actually being able to swim.
Yeah.
But I remember like in VR in Minecraft, like stepping up to the water's edge and looking down and feeling that like hesitation to jump in a way that I hadn't when I wasn't using VR. And it does add to the exploration of you feeling like you're more in that world. The problem is like with that experience, I'd hooked up an Xbox controller and it was a little wonky to try to look around and also move with the control stick. Alex, I've demoed just very little of, but we're at that sticking point with VR to where the exploration is so stilted because you're either having to sort of teleport to set points that you select and jump to, or you're having to sort of squish in these traditional control stick controls that are kind of at odds with what your body and head is experiencing.
Just got to spend thousands of dollars on an omnidirectional treadmill.
Yeah, so
Ready Player One.
That's where I'm kind of waiting on the VR open world experience for a little while.
Alex does it about as well as I think you can with current technology, and
I mean, I think
you're still teleporting.
As with any conversation about games, I think you can look at things like what's an interesting gimmick versus like what is like a deep fundamental like mechanical change that can be made. I don't know. I mean, I know people talk a lot about like, we have AI, we can have like generated conversations. I don't really like talking to NPCs if I don't have to most of the time. Like it's kind of fun. Like if it really like look, I mean, it's on a case-by-case basis, but like that doesn't really bother me. I mean, what bothers me is when they just kind of stand there like a Muppet, like in the Fallout games. I'm sorry that I don't like. One of the things they really improved on with the newest Horizon game is the conversations just look better. They're just shot and blocked better, and it's not just like again like the Muppet talking.
So janky.
And I get it. Like it's people. That's like a cute thing for some people. Like they was it Outer Wilds? No, not Outer Wilds. What's the space one?
They're both space.
No. I'm thinking there's the one where you're on planets that's like I'm doing an awful job describing this. There were two games, Outer Worlds.
Outer Worlds and Outer Wilds.
Outer Worlds. I'm sorry. So
but they're both in space.
I realized as I was saying that it's really hard to narrow Outer Worlds, but Outer Worlds is a newer game, and that was kind of like a cope sequel to the earlier. Cope sequel. That's a word I use for like
New Vegas.
Spiritual successor. Yeah, it was a spiritual successor. Was what's that developer's name?
Is it Obsidian?
Obsidian. Yeah. So it was like a spiritual successor to those games, and they kind of it's the same thing. Where like you talk to someone, and then all of a sudden it's like this, and then they just kind of are like. And I get it. Like it's there are people that's nostalgic for.
Heard of the high elves.
Well, I like movies, and so I am not one of those people that's like, oh, the blades of grass look so awesome in this new Spider-Man game. But like, I mean, they're weird.
Ghost of Tsushima though, like the blades of grass.
It was
legitimately
nice grass.
I don't only care about graphics. What I care about is presentation.
That grass.
And for an open world game, a big part of it to me is feeling lost in this world. And when everything just is so stiff and janky and like glitchy, like I feel pulled out of this world. And so that's just my personal thing. I'm not into that, potato. But I think the ways that open world games could improve is having more organic conversations and having those side moments and having or just a pat on the back for games that already do that well, like Red Dead Redemption 2, like where you really, the side quests and the characters that you talk to feel very naturally integrated into the world, both narratively and visually. And as far as like conceptual things, again, I think that this is something that I really could see working well in the next Zelda, just because we've been talking about this so much, but also other games. Multiverses are hot right now. I really do hope that trend passes. That's a different conversation. But I think having the same we've talked about sequels where you reuse the same world in the next game. What about like different versions of the overworld in the same game, like you're switching between times or dimensions or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would love, because I'm a huge Majora's Mask fan, I would love a DLC pack for Tears of the Kingdom where it's like something where you're like going to Termina or the moon is falling from the sky and you have to do something. That would be pretty incredible. I also have been wanting a Mario Zelda crossover for a long time. Where
your lips to God's ears.
Mario adventure open world.
Don't worry, Illumination's going to give you that.
But Zelda,
topic,
but I would like what I thought might happen in Tears of the Kingdom, and not reverse spoiler alert, it doesn't. But like I thought you would like go into the past Hyrule. And like it would be the same overworld, so they could reuse it. But like you would like there would be like different people and buildings and stuff.
And they bait you so hard because they're like, "Ooh, Zelda goes into the past," and you're like,
"Oh,
sweet."
the ancient tunic
and then
you get.
But here's just side note. The games are called Legend of Zelda. I like that this game gave Zelda something to do. She's got her own thing going on. Honestly, it's kind of cool.
No spoilers.
But she's doing spoiler. There is Zelda does legendary things in Legend of Zelda, but like having an open world game where like you reuse the open and it's what it's it's reusing whatever. Like there are parts of all kinds of games where it's like, oh, you're in this area, but now there's like floating rocks and it's creepy or whatever. But like having like a layered reality, like an alternate dimension or AR, like this is the same overworld, but like here's all this and this you can flip back between the two. I know
like Link Between Worlds and Link to the Past, kind of.
like exactly like that. But like because the Zelda game specifically, the concept of dual timelines, dual realities,
or Oracle of Ages.
Well, that's what the Depths basically was, because it mirrors the map in a lot of different ways. It basically is the Dark World.
It's inverse.
But like I think that other open world games could benefit from that in a way where it's like not terraforming, not necessarily like going to another dimension, but like. Yes, you think you've discovered this world, you think you know it very well, but like here's like a version of it that like is not even like a challenge mode, but like something that is layered on top of it, where even if you've done the post game or even if it gives you that much more to explore, and they would probably save on development time because it's going to be superficially similar in a lot of ways.
Speaking of Majora's Mask, my thing that I want open worlds to do is convince me that stuff is happening when I'm not there. Convince me that the world is actually alive.
Yeah.
And that people or characters, whatever, doing stuff. That is so rare to this day. Like I am just not convinced with almost any open world game that things aren't just. I mean, I know this literally is the case, but things aren't just spawning in around me and are just centered around only moving, only being active when I'm there.
And I'm glad you mentioned
Mask, not an open world game, arguably, but that game. You literally see as you go throughout the game the stuff that's happening, and it happens whether you're there or not, and you can miss stuff. And that's what's great about the whole time traveling mechanic. There's so many open world games where I'm like, I don't believe it. Like, I don't believe Ghost of Tsushima, great game. Something in my brain is like, nothing is happening unless I'm there.
And that's and so.
I don't know what that looks like mechanically, other than obviously how Majora's Mask handles it.
I'm gonna execute a hairpin turn from that point to another one, which is. You're absolutely right, and I think I said before I don't really know or care about how AI can be integrated and make more realistic conversations. But what they can do is give these characters like routines and lives. And I thought for sure they were going to do that in Tears of the Kingdom. And there are parts where people have things they do at night and day and they move around. But that's what I would. That's
little bit.
Well, that's what I would love. That's what I'd love to see is have a Majora's Mask style system for like time, and maybe you can't do it. Like, because then the whole point of that one is it's 3 days and it's a small area, so they did that. But like, I would love to see something like that.
It doesn't have to be everybody. It just needs to be enough to jump over that bar.
And to have that be blown out on a larger scale. But that brings me to something that I think we should also touch on is like tropes in open world games beyond the way that they're played. A lot of them are post-apocalyptic, and I think the reason is to me because one, it puts the world in a state where you can kind of. You feel okay doing whatever because whatever. Everything's falling apart.
The world's already ended. So
because Breath of the Wild is essentially a post-apocalyptic game. Fallout's a post-apocalyptic game. Arguably
also,
God of War.
You don't have to render as many characters.
But that's it. But that's what I'm saying. And that's kind of that joke about like how for about 10 years in the 2000s, every main character was like a bald guy because hair is hard to do. And games are full of that. Like Mario looks the way he does because the contrast color on his overalls made him more distinct as a sprite. I mean, it's more complicated than that. But like necessity is the mother of invention. So like a lot of times trends follow from technical limitations, and I think that once we move past those technical limitations,
Yeah.
hopefully, and developers obviously are, publishers
I don't
are known to
see
be lazy.
why
but
we can't move past those already. Like, you look at something like Horizon or Spider-Man or whatever, we're already doing these huge, hyper-detailed worlds with hundreds, thousands of people. Now, I know they're impermanent, many of them, and they fade in and out as you're there to give you the illusion that there's
all
lots
their
of
cars
people.
are kind of the same color.
But, like, we're already getting there. Like, at the very least, like, again, development's very hard. I get that this stuff is very difficult to do, but why can we not, for some number of characters, story related, or even some side characters that are relatively prominent, why can't we have a database that's like, as you go through the game, they have these different things that happen, and obviously they don't render if you're not there, but when you're in the areas where they show up realistically doing whatever they're supposed to do to support the game narrative.
Pick up where they're supposed to.
And pick up where they're supposed to. And they despawn when you're not there, but you get the idea that things are happening whether you're there or not by just going through the game. Why can we not do that? I don't understand.
I think what's a really funny example of that, which frustrates me to no end, but to come back to Elden Ring, as you progress through the game and you do certain things for certain characters and you don't do things for others, there are consequences for aspects of the game that you'll never get to experience. But the way that they go about it is such a weird, and I know it's a technical limitation, I'm sure of it, but like times where like I would be doing an event, some kind of side quest with a character, and like they wouldn't do the next thing until I slept or sat or whatever at a side of grace.
Recycle it,
and then it would recycle into the next, but I would have to sit at the side of grace, and then it would recycle to the next. And you never saw them go anywhere. They would just sort of teleport to the next place where their plot continued. And it was like, this is a big and complicated game. I know that, but like this is such like a weirdly like limited approach.
Same lines. I hate when a game does not acknowledge what I've done in the game. And
I don't think it goes without saying that I think Elden Ring really has set the pace, has set the standard, because I mean that game just blew everything else out of the water, and it was just so visually and structurally interesting.
Terrible storytelling. I know that's controversial, but I played through that entire game and beat it and never knew what was going on.
But Kyle, environmental storytelling means that if I just say the words environmental storytelling enough, that means that I can get away with being as lazy as I want to with an actual narrative, and my game is all of a sudden amazing and a true artistic masterpiece. Even though I did jack shit to tell an actual story.
Let me try to make peace here. I think that kind of storytelling is very annoying and bad for a linear-ish game like Dark Souls or Bloodborne. I think it actually works incredibly for an open world game, precisely because you are incentivized to wonder. And to me personally, and maybe it's just because I'm a little more interested in like kind of suspense and horror media, where I like, okay, here's this creepy thing, here's this creepy place. I don't really know what's going on, but I kind of want to check it out. I kind of want to run away at the same time. Like,
what do you need to know? The story is the world is sad and you're sad.
Yes.
Deal with it.
dies and that's it.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just, the moral is the story is something I've said my entire life, is that if you have a chance to hook up with a blue girl with 4 arms, you say yes. So,
good Lord. Well, what I'm asking for, because I agree, and I'll admit it. When I went through that game, I went back and watched a bunch of lore videos. I read a bunch of stuff, and I wanted to know more about it. And it did encourage me to read about the items, and that was part of the reward of finding cool stuff. Is like, oh, that kind of fleshes it out a little bit. But there needs to be enough core story beats to where I care. And by the time I got to the end of that game, I fundamentally did not care about what was happening because I didn't know what was going on. And that's really
here's the thing. You either have it on one way or the other. You either have it as it's environmental and the world's just sad and doomed. Feel sad about it. We're not going to tell you anything else. And on the other side, you have Death Stranding, where we're going to tell you a lot of stuff, and you're still not going to know what's happening.
Everybody's name is literally and figuratively what they are, and I love that game. But that is opposite. Like I said before, opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think it is very idiosyncratic. I know how you feel, because when Bloodborne was my introduction to that series, and I was so angry because I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't care about these stupid item descriptions. I don't know what any of this means. And then you eventually it's an acquired taste, I would say. And I think that open world games, that is what is so bold, in my opinion, about Elden Ring is that like they could have watered that stuff down. Like, I mean, talk about overpowering, HUDs and like all these like mission lists on Ubisoft games. Like, it's just so like holding your hand. Like, I like the fact that like that was what I liked about it, is that it is so mysterious and that it carries that mystery over into the structure of the game itself.
I will say, in case anybody watches this and is like, you only like games that tell a direct story and it has to be told to you and you're too stupid to put the pieces together yourself. It doesn't have to be. It's just like, don't bait me. Don't like imply that you're going to tell me a story and then be like, just kidding. The world's just sad. Deal with it. Like, I love Subnautica a lot. The second game is but the first game is incredible. The story of that game is like, you can say it in one sentence, which I will not say because they haven't played it yet and I'm still trying to force them to play it. But the story of that game is essentially one sentence. It basically doesn't exist. Like, it is the barest little story to like give you something to go toward if you're not sure what to do next. It just gives you something. It gives you some sense of progression if you don't progress the game under your own power, so to speak. Yeah. And I love that game. And that game is like all environmental storytelling all the time. It's like, how do these things interact with each other? How does the world work? How does the biology work? How did like previous visitors to this place like interact and what happened to them? And it's all, you're like the only one there for the most part. Like, so I don't have to be spoon-fed a story. I'm just saying, like, pick one. Don't just be like, sad world, be sad.
So I'm looking around here, and this is an excellent discussion.
Sure.
I'm starting to see quite a bit of red on people out here in the sun, and I think that's a good indicator
for too long.
that we've overtouched the grass today, and the sun is trying to kill us.
We need to have an episode just on the Zelda series. We can go into this more.
There's so much to discuss.
That's open world.
I really do think we've touched on so many great aspects of open world games today. Closing remarks, we'll try to keep it brief here before we get cooked. But is real life an open world game?
It is if you want it to be.
It's wide linear.
Too true. Too true.
Too true. Too true. But
no, it's a survival game, obviously.
It is open world survival horror that none of us know how to craft. But no, the reason I asked that question is I think that's what we're trying to accomplish here on Remember Places. Is I think we want to encourage all of you, the viewers, to not limit yourself to video games and exploring the world and getting out there and not just touching grass, but being in different places and exploring and discovering all that there is to offer out there. So I guess in closing, if you enjoyed this, please like, please comment, please subscribe. All of your support is going to help us be able to bring you to new places to discuss new topics in gaming and pop culture and movies, whatever you guys think would be an interesting discussion. And if you have recommendations for us, we are all ears. I mean, we've got a long list of things, places we want to go and topics we want to discuss, but do not hesitate to put down in the comments where you want us to go next and what you want us to talk about.
We don't even only have to talk about games.
Yeah. Pop culture. I mean, I think that, pop culture is downstream from culture, but I think we like it. We know a lot about it. We all have our own backgrounds and professions and experience that we like to bring to these discussions, and there's plenty more places and plenty more things to discuss.
Absolutely. So thank you guys for tuning in, and please join us on the next episode of Remember Places.
Of which we don't know what the subject is yet.
Let's just figure it out together.
That's right. Take it easy.
See you next time.